Today on CityCast Nashville, it's time for our Friday News Roundup, and we're unpacking mysteries, like which Metro officials were surprised by the arrest of some unhoused neighbors, what words the Office of Homeless Services has to stop using if they want to keep their massive federal grant, and why Southwest Airlines decided to betray us all. I'm joined by Nashville Banner Editor-in-Chief Steve Cavendish and producer Daniel Sumstein. It's Friday, March 14th. I'm your executive producer, Whitney Pasterek, and this is what Nashville's talking about. Well, I'm so excited to welcome, finally, Steve Cavendish. What are you, the executive editor of the Nashville Banner? Is that your title? Head Steve at the Nashville Banner?
Editor and president, but Head Steve is what we use around the shop. So,
for those of you who don't know, the Nashville Banner, a great independent journalism institution here in town. They provide so many of our stories. We've had both Stephen Hale and Stephen Elliott on. So now we got the boss, Steve. And of course, Daniel Sumstein, our producer, also joining us.
Sup, everyone.
Before we dive in, I do want to just give everybody out there in Radio Land a heads up. We've got some severe storms coming in overnight tonight. So we just want to recommend that everybody keep an eye on Nashville severe weather, local news, meteorologists, whatever. They're saying it's probably going to come in like 3 to 4 a.m. And all hazards are possible. Steve, Daniel, what do y'all use to wake yourselves up at night if there's weather?
Oh, God, I tried to sleep through it.
Yeah.
I have one of 3 dogs who will wake me up. So,
but you don't have an app on your phone or anything?
No. Canine alarm clock is better than any app.
Yeah. Our dog Ryman would be freaking out. So he's typically my alarm clock as well.
Well, I have the Stormwatch Plus app on my phone, which goes off if I need to get to my safe place.
I recommend an 85-pound Mastiff. It'll that'll wake you up in a hurry.
Well, anyway, everybody be careful, but let's dive into the news of the week. Daniel, there's one story and only one story amidst all the chaos in the world that people are truly pissed about right now.
Dude, people are pissed at Southwest Airlines. In case you've been living under a rock these days, Southwest announced on Tuesday that starting May 28th, they're going to start charging for the first and second checked bags.
No!
An unspeakable sin.
I am no longer free to move about the country.
Their whole thing is we have heart. And it's like, now you're just soulless like all the rest of them.
How many people do you know in your life who are, because they have 50% of the gates here in Nashville, are all in on Southwest?
Oh, I'm all in on Southwest. Also because the place I fly most often is Houston.
Yeah.
Also Southwest. So I can get from here to my mom in like 2 hours flat.
Same here. I can get to my mom in Cleveland in 2 hours. But we have their points card because we wanted to accumulate, miles and take care of the perks and whatever else.
It's destroying my favorite airline. Daniel, why is this happening?
I think it's important to call out that activist shareholder Elliott Investment, they bought a $1.9 billion stake in Southwest back in June. And honestly, like nothing good ever comes from these investment firms or private equity. They just make things more expensive and worse. And they reported a record revenue of $27.6 billion last year. But, that's not good enough for our shareholders.
Not if you can get $1 billion more from people who need to pack more than 2 pairs of underwear and a toothbrush.
It's a sad day.
Yeah.
It's a very sad day.
I've been Southwest loyal. I honestly rarely check my bag, but like at this point, there's no reason to fly with them.
How do you not check a bag if you're going for like a week?
I've got my like Patagonia bag that fits everything.
We went to Europe. God, this is like 15 years ago. And I did the whole thing in a carry-on.
Nice.
Boys can get away with that. Girls need outfits.
Well, that's true. And I should note for the record that my wife did not pack on a carry-on. So
institutional misogyny in baggage fees. But there's good news, Daniel, for flyers, for cheapskates like myself at B&A, yeah?
Yeah, so Spirit Airlines, which I feel like is often, people just joke about that, but they are adding 6 more destinations. I think I saw like Kansas City, Baltimore. So they're clearly trying to attract, the people who are giving a big middle finger to Southwest now.
Spirit, obviously, you have to pay for like oxygen to breathe, but their fares are truly lower. I mean, we talked to B&A Cheap Flights, the woman on Instagram who tracks those things. And, she has found in the past like $19 round trip.
But they make it all back in fees.
There's no free lunch in the not so friendly skies anymore.
I'm a free agent. What's up, Delta?
Anyway, well, let's move on to, Steve, some of the biggest news y'all ran in the banner this week was about issues surrounding our unhoused community, starting with a blockbuster piece on Monday where two of your Steves, Elliot and Hale, reported that 10 people were arrested and charged for violating the state's felony camping law last November. Curiously, that happened in the days leading up to the CMA Awards, which I'm sure was just a
pure coincidence.
But these arrests came as a massive surprise to community advocates and Metro officials who've mostly declined to enforce that law. So first of all, Cavendish, who made these arrests?
This is the byproduct of a relationship between the Downtown Partnership and a company called Solarin. And Solarin is a security company that has been hired by the Downtown Partnership to help kind of clean up downtown. There are legitimate questions around security and safety kind of within that when you have that many people and that many people drinking. And
yeah, is Solarin cleaning up vomit?
They are not cleaning up vomit. And so the Downtown Partnership enters into this agreement with Solarin. Solarin, if you'll remember this a couple of years ago, ran into issues because they were using people, security, who were not certified. And so they were using Millersville cops and they were using some other folks. They have graduated to using THP, and Tennessee Highway Patrol officers have arrest powers at all times. And so it makes it convenient if you're going to hire a security force that they have arrest powers. If you'll notice, and this is in the story, the DA largely declined to prosecute, or the charges were dropped kind of at the court level. There's no appetite to arrest people on this camping law here in Nashville, and yet the THP officers were enforcing the rule. It's this weird overlap between city, state, private interests, and it caught the mayor's office and several people around town by surprise. And there was a lot of back and forth, and some of this is in the story about them reaching out, the THP leadership, and saying, what the hell's going on? THP was kind of embarrassed by this. They didn't know exactly how many of their people were doing this kind of on the side. You have to declare all your side jobs if you're working, like private security. So there was a little bit of egg on faces here, and I don't think you're going to see this going forward. But it does kind of illustrate the tension between the Downtown Partnership, which is largely business interests. The city pays into the Downtown Partnership, and everybody else.
So we've got Tennessee Highway Patrolmen moonlighting as private security guards, but they didn't tell their bosses that they were doing that. And then they made these arrests that shocked everybody because in Davidson County, we're not really enforcing the felony camping law in the same way that we're not enforcing like minor marijuana possession.
Nashville has decided not to do this. Nashville has closed encampments and moved encampments, but they've also done it as part of a homelessness strategy that largely tries to get people into housing and into support services and not just throw them in jail.
I'm glad you brought up support services because that's another story that the banner ran this week, is that you're covering the challenges that the Metro Office of Homeless Services is facing as they're trying to protect their federal funding. In January, Nashville homelessness service providers celebrated the announcement of a record $11.85 million in funding for the Continuum of Care program. And the Continuum of Care is basically, we've identified someone who is unhoused, and how do we ensure that we get them safely off the street and into housing? How do we track their progress through this continuum of care? So now Office of Homeless Services is having to eliminate any reference to, say it with me, diversity, equity, and inclusion to make sure that they can keep that funding. The list of words they're having to eliminate includes things like accessible, at risk, barrier, disability, and mental health, in addition to references to gender and sexual identity and racism. So, Cavendish, is this making things easier or harder on our already embattled Office of Homeless Services.
Obviously, I think it makes it harder for them because now they're having to go through and kind of word police everything that they put out. And you saw this in the story. They understand sort of the change in administration and kind of what the hoops that they have to jump through. April Calvin, I think her quote to us was, bringing in 9 million to 11 million to Nashville is far more important than digging our heels in. I think that's admirable that she has said, look, what we want to do is take care of these people, get them off the streets. And I think this is, in a microcosm, is what you're seeing kind of throughout the Trump administration. Various agencies have been given these kind of word lists to sometimes hilarious effects.
Yes, I saw the Enola Gay is no longer able to be referenced on federal websites due to it having the word gay in its name.
Yeah. It is a hammer approach. And I think you're seeing the Office of Homeless Services doing their best to kind of sidestep the hammer.
A lot of people using the Control F command right now. Well, so that record amount of money, that $11+ million, still has not been distributed here locally. And then it looks like the federal contractor who was tasked with helping the city do that distribution has just now recently seen its contract eliminated. Is that DOJ eliminating that federal contractor? And what do we do now?
There's a real question about kind of how the grants processes are going to work going forward. The mayor runs a Friday roundtable that most of the reporters in town go to. And the persistent question they get is, how much bandwidth are you expending trying to figure out what to do with federal processes? And what they say is, between Metro Legal and the Department of Finance kind of digging in on all these things, they're spending a lot of time just trying to figure out what game of whack-a-mole we're playing this week and kind of how the city can continue to do business as usual with the federal government, with the state government, and kind of keep things stable. I mean, we're getting into budget season now, and the really interesting thing is that the amount of uncertainty that is still surrounding all of these processes is going to create a lot of uncertainty, particularly for M&PS, which is the biggest chunk. I mean, I think there's like $100 million in federal money, and kind of how are they going to figure out what they have for the next fiscal year or not.
The Department of Education this week cut something like half its staff, right? So
that'll make it easier.
First, right? Like Linda McMahon, the head, quote unquote, of the Department of Education, is now saying that that's the first step towards dissolving the department altogether. That happens, and it's like there is no budget season.
Linda McMahon, last seen in a multi-part wrestling documentary. Quite good, but I don't know that that's necessarily the person that first came to mind when you thought Department of Education.
Well, she's exactly the right person if you want to privatize education in this country. There are so many aspects of this year's budget that I think are going to remain question marked because we really don't know. I've texted you, Cavendish, and asked, like, what do we know about how these federal cuts or potential federal cuts are going to impact the transit referendum, which was predicated largely on, if we do this, it will unlock federal funding. If that federal funding doesn't exist, what happens? If our buses are too equitable or diverse or inclusive?
I think Metro has a real issue here with not knowing kind of how the Department of Transportation is going to act. Now, unlike the Department of Education, the Department of Transportation is not being singled out, for removal. The federal government still has obligations around transportation and around making transportation work that you just kind of can't get out of ideologically.
But do they, though?
You can't break everything, can you? Question mark?
I guess I kind of want to just end this section by quoting Allie Wallace, the executive director of Open Table, from that first story in the banner this week about the downtown arrests. It's alarming to me, she said, the difference between somebody who can just be a drunk tourist in the sidewalk versus somebody who literally doesn't have anywhere else to go. The language we use around that is just so dehumanizing, and it's really disheartening. And I guess I want to read that just because so much of what's happening right now is incredibly dehumanizing and disheartening to a lot of people, whether it's immigrant families or LGBTQIA people or unhoused folks, or even just anybody who wants to make sure their kids' public school still works. So, let's keep our chins up and keep fighting, I guess, and hope that the mayor and our Metro officials are doing the same.
I think they are, largely. The question is going to be, how much is this going to cost the city going forward?
My favorite place in Nashville to take friends from out of town is the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum. It makes me feel so proud to be able to show off our city's country music roots. But y'all, it's not just a tourist attraction. Did you know that local kids always visit free at the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum? Kids age 18 and under who are residents of Davidson and bordering counties, including Cheatham, Robertson, Rutherford, Sumner, Williamson, and Wilson, can take advantage of all the engaging and educational activities the museum has to offer this spring at no cost. Plus, they can bring 2 accompanying adults who get 25% off admission. I love the museum's Taylor Swift Education Center. They've got music, dance, art programs, and on Fridays this month, you can check out Irish step dancing, a musical instrument petting zoo, and plenty of other fun activities. Learn more and plan your visit at countrymusichofoffame.org/local-kids.
We're back with Steve Cavendish, editor-in-chief of the Nashville Banner, and producer Daniel Sumstein. And we're going to just really quickly blaze through some stuff that's happening at the legislature because, hey, session is still in session. We're going to start with the biggest news of the legislature this week, which was, again, around House Bill 793. We've talked about this one before. It's from House Majority Leader William Lamberth, perhaps best known for asking a bunch of kids who were protesting at the Capitol after Covenant what kind of gun they'd be comfortable being shot with. And this bill is the one that would allow school districts and charter schools to opt out of enrolling students who lack permanent legal status. He and his co-sponsor, Bo Watson, Senator Bo Watson, have both been very open about the fact that this is not a law, it's a lawsuit. And their goal is to overturn a 40-year-old Supreme Court decision, Plyler versus Doe, that found denying education to kids based on immigration status was unconstitutional and violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. We know right now that the Supreme Court, based on another Tennessee case, the HB-SB 1, providing care for transgender minors case that the Supreme Court has recently heard, they don't really seem to care that much about the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Cavendish, what's your analysis? Like, would this lawsuit be successful in overturning that 4-decade-old precedent?
They have picked one that they think they have their best shot at. And you're seeing this a lot in sort of legislatures around the country as the courts have flipped, trying very specifically to undo kind of decades-old precedents. Plyler versus Doe was a 5-4 decision originally. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to pretend to.
Why not?
Give you the trenchant legal analysis that you want here. I think from a political point of view, they think that they can make hay with it. The interesting thing to me is that they're not mandating this. They're leaving it to local systems. I think they realize that if they did this kind of statewide, there would be issues. And if you go back to the original kind of court analysis on Plyler versus Doe, what they said was it's in the interest of the country to have an informed, learned citizenry, even for those who are not documented U.S. citizens.
We are starting to see some Republicans waver a little bit. There were massive protests at the Capitol this week.
Sarah Grace Taylor, who's our State House reporter, did some really good work on this last week when this was in the Senate, detailing sort of the fault lines around where this is in the Republican supermajority. It's not universal among Republicans that this is a good idea. Senator Gardner-Heyer at Chattanooga had basically said, why are we doing this to kids? Why are we targeting kids? Don't we have better things to do? And I think you're seeing some of that sentiment in the House as well. This was not a huge vote in committee. And so I think that you're going to see, if and when this thing gets to the House floor, you're going to see some Republicans sort of defecting on it. Will enough defect on it in order to prevent it from passing? I don't think so.
Daniel, what else is out there that you're keeping an eye on?
I've been keeping up on Senate Bill 955, which is sponsored by Senator Pharrell Hale. That passed the Tennessee Senate on Thursday. And this bill would essentially allow medical professionals to refuse or deny care based on their own personal or religious beliefs.
Okay, so that's like pharmacists not wanting to dispense birth control, I'm guessing. It's definitely abortion related. Could it dip into vaccines?
Totally. I mean, yeah, not only is this like so morally absurd, but I also feel like, hate to bring up the Cheeto again, but Cheetos,
we don't have to talk about the Cheeto.
Like the same way of like holding the figurative guardrails where this is absolutely going to get abused by medical professionals. There's just nothing holding medical professionals back from abusing this. I don't know. I mean, I read stuff like this and it honestly makes me question why I live here sometimes. Like, why get into the profession of being a doctor? The moral calling for that is to help people regardless of who you are.
So there's certain continuums of care that the federal government requires. In this case, there's a thing called the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act, which kind of guarantees non-discriminatory access to medical care for large swaths of treatment. The federal guidelines are going to take precedent here, but there are instances.
Will we still have federal guidelines?
Well, for the time being, what you're more likely to see is cases like pharmacists and abortion drugs. Or one of the examples that was brought up was around assisted suicide, and like not mandating that doctors participate in assisted suicide, which is illegal in Tennessee. And the bill that would have kind of leaned into assisted suicide was already shot down in committee this session anyway. There's a lot of virtue signaling on the right for this, but the practical effect of this is really at the margins, because there's so much that on a regulatory basis that doctors are already kind of required to do.
Now that the horse of regulation is out of the barn and running rampant in the hospital, to paraphrase John Mulaney, there's a horse in a hospital. And we are back with Nashville Banner editor Steve Cavendish and producer Daniel Sumstein. All right, gentlemen, big news. District 32 council member Joy Stiles, check out her music videos on YouTube, told WKRN this week that plans to develop the former site of Starwood Amphitheater in Antioch have been revived.
I saw Guns N' Roses opening up for Aerosmith.
Yeah, you did.
At Starwood in, I think it was like 89.
This lot has sat vacant for 19 years. There's no real details yet about what's going in, but in a story with WKRN this week, Councilmember Stiles mentioned bus stops and, quote, opportunities for the community to gather and, quote, homages to the old site, which I really hope means a loudspeaker playing like Incubus 311 and Hoobastank, just on a loop.
And the reason is you.
Oh, God. You know, did everybody celebrate 311 Day this week? I'm afraid I missed it once again. Anyway, guys, what would you put if you were in charge? What would you put where Starwood used to be?
I would put a Hoobastank Hall of Fame. A Hall of Fame specific to Hoobastank.
I would put another amphitheater there. The market is so much bigger than when Starwood went under. You're trying to tell me that you couldn't come up with 45 dates a year that you could fill that place? And the access to that place, so much better than the former rock quarry that's down in Franklin that they've turned into an amphitheater. That place is like one of the most difficult places I've ever seen to get out of.
Yeah.
Like, just plan on 2 hours getting out. I
think we talked a lot about this surrounding the stadium discussions. Like, what is this insistence in putting these giant things in places that are very difficult to get into and out of and that snarl up traffic for miles around them? I mean, I know that our urbanist friends think it should be dense and urban and walkable, but there is a reason why things like stadiums and amphitheaters have historically been placed not smack dab in the middle of towns.
On Starwood, it's on a big main road. It's easy to get in and out of. That was one of the joys of it, is like when the show was over, you were out of there in like 15 or 20 minutes. This is a sign of how old I am now. That my most important features are like, how long does it take me to get home after the show?
100%. I went to a Preds game last weekend and it was a nightmare getting home. I haven't been to a Preds game in 5 years, full disclosure. It's a long story why. But I used to be able to pop out, hop into an Uber and be on my way. And like 45 minutes after the game, I was still being told that I had to wait 30 minutes to get an Uber. I literally just got on a scooter and took myself across the river to Lakeside Lounge. I would rather risk my life on a scooter fleeing. But yeah, no, that's a big important thing. But bus stops, Cavendish, bus stops. It'll have bus stops.
It could have bus stops right now and it wouldn't matter. I mean, you'd be using like 1% of that property.
I know. Well, here's what I think we should do with it. We've talked a lot on this show about how comedian Nate Bargatze wants to do Nateland. his theme park to replace Opryland. Hopefully Nate Bargatze will buy the home of the former Starwood Amphitheater for his sort of like grand Universal Studios theme park / movie making empire.
I would totally support this plan.
All right. Finally, St. Patrick's Day celebrations are this weekend because Monday is not a great day for binge drinking. Daniel, what's going on?
I think the move is to party on Saturday. So it's starting with the St. Patrick's Day parade in 5 Points in East Nashville. That's going to be sweet. I think they're doing like an after party at Boston Commons. I went to Boston Commons last year and they ran out of Guinness. So I've kind of got a bone to pick with them. But regardless...
it's like the one thing you can't do is run out of Guinness.
Exactly.
I can just hear Dropkick Murphys like playing in the back of Daniel's head as he like marches up to Boston Commons, shaking his fist.
And then I know that Von Elrod's is doing something like a big celebration there if you want to do the whole Germantown thing. And then lastly, I mean, it's always super packed, but McNamara's on St. Patrick's Day is just the absolute best. I know that they're having their like couple different bands there on Saturday, so highly recommend McNamara's. What are you guys doing for St. Patrick's Day? Are you celebrating anywhere?
I'm old, and so no. But I fully endorse any kind of pre-celebration on Saturday as opposed to going out on a Monday.
Totally.
Yes, I like this St. Patrick's Day observed thing that we're doing this year. I think we're supposed to have corned beef and cabbage too. So I'm soliciting recommendations for anybody out there in listener land. Like if you want to email us at nashville@citycast.fm, who's got the best corned beef and cabbage specials in town? Is that weird? Is that something that only old people still do?
McNamara's, again, has an incredible corned beef and cabbage.
But they'll probably still have that like on Wednesday, right?
Yeah, I think it's just like a permanent. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, everybody be safe and make good choices if you are going out on one of the biggest drinking holidays of the year. Don't drink and drive. Don't really even drink and scoot. Take it from me. We do want to just send yet another shout out to our local astronaut, Butch Wilmore, and his fellow astronaut, Sonny Williams, who are, we regret to inform you, still stranded on the International Space Station. We were so excited. We reran our conversation with them on Wednesday because NASA was supposed to launch the SpaceX thing, capsule, whatever the hell it is, the Dragon, I don't know, to go pick them up. NASA was supposed to launch the thing that was going to go pick them up, and they didn't. They're saying they might be able to launch tonight, weather permitting, but then it's still going to be a couple days before that spaceship gets there. I don't know the terminology.
Are we depending on SpaceX to go do this?
We are depending on SpaceX to go do this.
Man, been a rough few weeks for SpaceX.
It's not the new things that have the rapid unscheduled disassemblies. It's an old thing that's made it up there like 40 times. So it's like the difference between an original Tesla and a Cybertruck. You know, they're sending the original Tesla. A lot of those still on the road.
Whitney, I'm just thinking about how you were like complaining about waiting 30 minutes for your Uber after the Preds game.
Oh
and
my
they've been
God.
they've been up there for like
9
years.
months.
Yeah. No.
Oh, well, Butch, Sonny, we hope your Uber gets there soon. And everybody else, have a great week. Cavendish, thank you so much for joining us. Please come back sometime.
Anytime.
All right. And Marie, we hope you're having fun in Key West, you jerk.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody have a good weekend. That's all for today here on CityCast Nashville. Our executive producer is me, Whitney Pasterek. Our producer is Daniel Sumstein. Our Hey Nashville newsletter editor is Margaret Kingsbury. Our theme music is by Prof Jenkins. And our host, Marie Cecile Anderson, had better bring us presents from Florida or she's in trouble. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell your friends? Rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Nashville newsletter. We'll be back Monday morning with more news from around the city. Y'all take care of each other.